Welcome to the Clarity Advisor Show, where you'll learn how to grow your team today. Join Ken Trupke and his guests as they discuss what works and doesn't work to grow your team in today's world. And now, your host, Ken Trupke.
Hello and welcome to another episode of the Clarity Advisor Show. Have you thought about running a franchise operation? You know that leading teams can be tricky, but running franchises, especially retail franchises with high turnover, can be especially challenging. Well, my guest today has run several franchises, has several franchises about to open, and is an expert in that area. So we'll dive in. Please welcome my good friend, Chris Wilson. Chris, welcome to the Clarity Advisor Show.
Hey, Ken, great to see you. Thanks for having me.
Yeah, absolutely. So tell the audience a little bit about you, how you got where you are and what you're doing now and who mainly you serve with your different franchises.
Sure. So my background's in information technology, was working for a couple of companies, got laid off once, didn't like the way that felt, thought that I would use franchising as a tool to have some additional stream of income in between those dips. So I invested in franchising a few years ago, built a nice little empire. I've done fitness, some food and beverage, and some beauty or wellness. I also run a franchise consulting firm where I help people figure out what franchise to invest in or how to turn their existing business into a franchise. And that's kind of how we got linked up and chatting today.
Right. That's right. Yeah, I heard you on another podcast and then reached out to connect. So let's talk about that a little bit. Who are you looking for when it comes to clients for your consulting business, the franchise consulting business? Who do you look for and how do you work with them?
Sure. So I look for anyone who is having trouble narrowing down the almost 4,000 different franchises out there. Maybe people kind of like me who got laid off once or twice. It was actually 3 times for me. But, want to either have an additional stream of income or some just want to leave corporate America altogether. So those are the clients that I've been working with closely, helping them narrow down those 4,000 franchises into a short list that makes sense for them. So I help them by having a consultation, listening to them, finding out what their goals and aspirations are, and using a process that I've developed over the last couple of years to really narrow down those franchises that might be a good fit for them based on certain criteria that we uncover in our conversations. Then just walk them through the process, show them how to gather as much information as possible during the discovery phase, show them how to validate that information, and of course, introduce them to resources such as franchise attorneys, CPAs. Anyone can help them along that way.
Okay, excellent. So some of those questions might be how much time they have to contribute, how much money they have to invest. What other things help you narrow down the holy cow 4,000 options? How do you get down to a handful that we can pick from?
Yeah, so ultimately, I asked clients to develop a list of unbreakables, non-negotiables. For me, I like to pick up my daughter from school at 3 p.m. normally. So there are businesses that will allow you to do that, right? And some businesses that won't. So investment range is obviously a big one. Risk tolerance. Some people like certain industries and want to stay away from others, and that's fine. So we ask all of those questions. And believe it or not, once you start checking off those things, they're really only a couple that make sense for you for what you're looking for.
Okay, excellent. So let's talk about your franchises specifically. What ones have you had and what ones do you have currently?
Sure. So I opened and ran 2 Club Pilates, which is a boutique fitness concept here in Orlando. I sold both of those units in December of last year. Currently, I'm building out a couple chicken cone locations with some business partners. Our first one should be open, knock on wood, in a few weeks. First one will be in Columbus, Ohio. So looking forward to that. And also in the process of building out some Salons by JC, which is a salon suite franchise. My first location will be here in the Orlando area, open in another couple of months as well.
Okay, fantastic. Well, I've got a couple other questions about those franchises, but I love the chicken cone. So it's a waffle cone. Tell me what it is. It's like a waffle and chicken nuggets. What do you got going on there?
I literally just left there a couple minutes ago. There's a location that I don't own that's here that I pop in on every once in a while. So I had it for lunch. Good food. I'm still enjoying that. But yeah, it's a waffle cone, a soft waffle cone, and you put chicken and the sauce inside the cone and you eat it together. So we call it fork-free chicken and waffles.
Oh man, that sounds so good. So, all right. So back to the story. So how did you say, you got laid off and were looking to do something that more you had control over. So how
Mhm.
did you narrow the 4,000 franchises down to those couple that you started with?
Yeah, I used a franchise consultant. So my idea of franchising when I first started was, McDonald's, Chick-fil-A, the big franchises that everyone has heard of. Those can be quite capital intensive in most cases. So I had a buddy and mentor who is a franchise consultant, and I called him up one Sunday afternoon and said, "Listen, I want to open a franchise. I don't have $1 million, and I don't want to open up a fast food franchise. Is there anything else out there?" And he said, "Sure, we can have a conversation." He was watching football. He's a big Steelers fan. So he said, "We can have a conversation after the Steelers game." And so we set some time to chat. We had a consultation and he asked me some questions, and the rest was history. He came back and said, "I think you should take a look at these franchises," and presented a couple brands to me. I took them, reviewed them, and kind of went through the process.
Okay, excellent. So, I mean, I know you and I've talked about this in the past. The Pilates is kind of a funny story because that's not necessarily something that you knew a lot about, that you personally did, and yet you're able to own and operate a Pilates studio. So tell us a little bit about that and how that works from the mindset of an owner rather than an employee.
Yeah, so I thought he was a little insane when he suggested that I run a Pilates studio. At the time, I did not know what Pilates was. I'd never even walked into a Pilates studio. I heard of it, but didn't have a real thorough understanding of what they did or how they helped the community. But as with anything else, more data is better, right? So he introduced me to the company. We started chatting, having conversations, and really did a lot of research outside of the conversations that we had with the franchise company to just find out, what the market was for that service. And as luck would have it, it turned out to be a really amazing opportunity. It checked a lot of the boxes that I was looking for. Number one, I was looking for something semi-absentee that I could continue my corporate career at the time. I was looking for something that was beneficial to the community. I wanted to help people get healthy or maintain their health. I was looking for something that I could feel good about, employing people and helping them put food on the table. So once I got out of my head around Pilates, you really realize that business is business, right? Whether your product is, a chicken cone or a Pilates studio, you really, as a business owner, need to find a way to maximize revenue and control costs, right? And so if you can wrap your head around what the product is and really hone in on the business model and figure out how to do those things well, you'll find some success.
Okay. Yeah. And I teased a little bit in the opening that there's typically high turnover in retail type franchises. What kind of team do you build, especially in a Pilates studio? I'm assuming it's experienced instructor types is who you're looking for. You can't just get anybody and train them up. But tell me about that. How do you find the right people? And then how do you build that culture and that team within your studios?
Yeah, real interesting, right? Because going into it, you think you need Pilates instructors. I was coming from a place in corporate America where we work 40 to 60 hours a week. I found out very quickly that Pilates instructors do not work 40 to 60 hours a week. It's rather impossible. It's actually very demanding on the human body. So most Pilates instructors work around 20 hours a week and sometimes much less than that. So from that perspective, you really had to make sure you did some good calculations about what the numbers look like as far as how many FTEs you need. The other side of the business is that we also needed what we call front desk staff. And those are people who are going to answer the phones and sell the memberships and handle customer service issues. So I, at one point, looked up and between the two studios had about 50 employees, 50. And so when you're building a team that's that big and has to work together all for the common goal, you really need to hone in on culture and make sure that people are buying into what you have going on, so that can be reflective as they take care of the guests, which are the people who pay the bills, right?
Yeah, excellent. So when we come back, I want to ask you about some of the examples of how exactly you do that and build those cultures and maybe some of the mistakes you made. We're going to take a short break. We'll be right back on the Clarity Advisors Show.
Is your business where you want it to be or on track to get there? Clarity Advisors helps business leaders improve communication and get your team aligned and engaged for greater success. We specialize in helping you streamline your sales and operating systems to improve efficiency and grow your profits. Call or text Ken at 616-822-2998 to have a complimentary 12-minute call to see what some clarity could do for you.
Welcome back to the Clarity Advisor Show. We're talking with franchise owner and expert Chris Wilson. Chris, before the break, you talked about a team of 50 in these Pilates studios. What were some of the challenges to pull them together? You got a lot of part-time people. You mentioned FTEs, full-time equivalent people. So you've got a lot of people in different roles trying to come together, as you said, to fill the goal of serving those customers. How did you do that? What were some of the things that worked well? And then share some of the things that maybe didn't work so well that we can learn from.
Right. So I think the first thing is understanding what type of roles you're trying to fill and what personalities will do best in those roles. So for example, with the front desk employees, they're going to spend a lot of time on the phone and in front of people. So they have to be a people person. So if you walk into the interview and they're just kind of, not very high energy, that's probably not someone that's going to do well in that role, because in that role, you need to have a lot of energy. You have to be able to empathize with the person who you're speaking to, understand what's going on, and do the job efficiently. With the Pilates instructors, it's a little different because Pilates is a very how would you say, you need to be certified at 500 hours is what our instructors need. So those people aren't just walking around on trees, right? Like they're not falling off of trees. So when you find one who's good, you have to take care of them, make sure that they understand that you're here to stay and have their best interest in mind. But then you also have to, because you're running a business, worry about the schedule and the rate that they're being paid and all of that. So what we tried to do was build a community where folks we're happy to come to work and happy to serve our clients. Of course, we made some mistakes along the way, hiring folks that maybe we didn't get the best feeling from in the interview, but for one reason or another went forward anyway. And sometimes it could be one step forward and two steps back. And so we learned that pretty quickly. We came up with what we thought were requirements, those must-haves. And if you didn't have them all, we didn't bring you in.
Excellent. Yeah. Let's dive deep on that. What were some of those must-have characteristics, especially for the instructors, where they're really the client facing? I'm assuming as a Pilates client, my instructor is going to be the make or break thing. If I like my instructor, I'm probably going to keep coming back. And if I don't, doesn't matter how much I like you or the front desk person, I'm probably not coming back. So what were some of those must-haves to make sure you got the right people on the team?
Sure. So the instructor had to be someone who really likes that job. Like he or she has to really enjoy doing it. It's not something that you can just kind of do because it's something to do, because there's a lot of work that goes into it. These instructors are creating a program every time someone walks into the studio based on their fitness needs. So there's a lot of research that has to be done, constantly refining their skills so that the product that they're presenting is top notch. You also have to think that some of our clients are taking classes 4, 5, 6 times a week. And so if you taught a class on Monday that was good, if you did the same class on Wednesday, you're not going to get as great a result because people saw it, did it already. So they constantly have to be refining their craft. And of course, they have to be high energy, ready to motivate people, understanding that people start in different areas from a fitness perspective, and just being able to meet people where they are.
Okay. Interesting. That's great. Yeah, it's so important to get the right people. And we say the first who, then what. Like if you don't have the right who on the team, it doesn't matter what you're going to have them do. It's not going to work if they're not a good fit for your culture and they're not the kind of person that's going to be a good person in that role and just be a person that you want on your team. So it's interesting how you screen. Let's pivot over a little bit to the chicken cone. That feels a little bit more. I don't think fast food's a bad thing, but it feels a little bit more like fast food. And so I'm assuming it's a different type of person that you're looking for and maybe even higher turnover. So talk about the challenges hiring there and who you're looking for. And again, what's worked and maybe what hasn't worked.
Yeah, so you're right. Totally different. In the Pilates, we're dealing with mostly professionals, whereas on the quick service restaurant side, you're dealing with high school students, college students in many cases, people that don't have a lot of business experience, so to speak, but have a lot of availability, right? So Same thing applies, though. I think you need people that are going to be accountable, that are going to be empathetic, that they're going to be where they say they're going to be when they're going to be there. There is a lot of turnover on that side of the business. I was talking to a colleague, and they hired a person, and the person went on break and never came back. Right? These are the realities that we deal with as business owners. But to mitigate that, we're trying to find motivated individuals who want to work here as much as we want them to work here.
Right, right. And motivation has to be, I believe, intrinsic. Like you can inspire people. I don't think you can motivate them. They've got to be motivated. And money, I don't believe can motivate. You just get that little burst a little bit for a short time if you give somebody a raise or their starting wage or whatever, but it can demotivate, right? It's either a neutral or a negative in my experience, that if you get the money right, people are just like, good, now I don't have to think about that. They're never like, woo, I hate this job, but I love the money. At some point, right? At some point, it just, the money's got to be okay. And then that's it. You can kind of set it aside. So money probably isn't what's driving your hires. And as you've mentioned a couple of times now, you've got to manage the cost side of the business against the revenues, or you're not going to be in business. So knowing that you can't just throw money at people, and even if you could, it doesn't really work ultimately. What are the kinds of things then that you do with a high turnover chicken cone kind of employee? What kinds of things do you do to make it an attractive place to work, that you can retain people and get the right people in the door?
Well, I think a lot of it is just relationship based, right? No one wants to feel like they're a number at any organization, even if it's only 3 people there, right? You want to know a little bit about them, about their family, what makes them go, what makes them tick. And hopefully you can build a relationship so that the money, obviously, from the financial perspective, is necessary. That's why people work, right? If we didn't need money, I don't know of anyone that would have a job, right? But other than that, you want them to know that you're a nice person and care about them and care about their family and want them to do well. I think the other thing that has served us well is we understand that jobs, careers are for a time, a specific season. And so sometimes this job helps prepare you for the next step in your career, and that's fine. I never expect any employee to work with or for us forever. I understand that if we can help hone your skills and make it so that you're more marketable in the next line of your career, then that's fine too. And we're happy with that.
Yeah, I love that idea of season. I use that all the time too, that it just helps. I find that it helps the team that isn't leaving to understand what's happening. Because even if a couple people leave at the same time, you can get everybody else saying, hey, what's going on? Should I be leaving? It sort of sends this wave of panic, and you say, listen, guys, it's a season. Some people, they've been with us for months. Some people have been with us for years. Everybody's different. Everyone's circumstances are different, and people are going to be here for as long as it's a fit. And that's okay. And when it's no longer a fit, we're going to leave on good terms. We're going to wish them well, and we're going to move on, and they're going to move on. And that's okay. I try to use a sports analogy, as a teams, each season, teams get new players, and some players leave or retire, and they trade for people. And like, look, this is the team for this season. And then next season, it's going to be a different team, and that's okay. So I love that concept. I find it's really helpful for people to think about, because you don't want people feeling bad either. They're going to come into a chicken cone, and they probably know they're only going to work there a couple of years, and then they're going to move on to something else. And if they know that that that's okay, well, then everybody can just kind of relax, and you can have a much healthier relationship where there's not these kind of unrealistic expectations of, well, you're going to be here for life, right? You're going to work your way up to manager of the chicken waffle, right? And like, hey, whoa, let's just relax about that. So, and by the way, I will from now on be saying fast service restaurant. That sounds like a more friendly phrase. So
it's all in the marketing, right?
You've been doing this for a while now, and obviously through some of the changes with the pandemic and food service and restaurants being shut down for a stretch. Talk a little bit about how you managed through some of that time, and even with the Pilates studios, the exercise places were closed for a stretch there. How did you manage through that, and what's maybe changed since then, and how have you adapted? And again, what's worked and what hasn't worked?
Yeah, I think the most important part is when the pandemic just happened, right? I don't think many of us knew that it was going to happen. We just woke up and were told to shut down our businesses, right? one of the things we had to do was really assess who was available, and what they could bring to the table, because the world changed, right? So kids were home from school. People had to look after other loved ones. And so the availability that we had in early 2020 was not the same, in March. All of a sudden it changed. And so, again, this is a relationship-based business. I think they all are. And so we said, hey, we understand that before you were, working 30 or 40 hours a week, whatever the case may be. Now that everything has changed, what's your new availability? How can we just assess what we have and see where we can help you, right? We don't know how many hours, as business owners, we didn't know how many hours needed to be filled because we didn't know when our doors were open and back open. So we just think that the most important part was to be relational with people, find out, what they were offering, and see if we could meet them where they were.
Excellent. Yeah, I totally agree. It was a challenging time to not know what was coming next. And it sounds like you really dove into the communication. Talk a little bit about what you did to stay connected to your team, especially when things were shut down and you just didn't know when you'd be asking people to come back to work. And then, like you said, you didn't know how available they were going to be or how willing they'd be to come back to work. So what kinds of things did you do to communicate and stay connected with your team?
So being that I was laid off 3 times in corporate America, I knew what didn't feel good. So I tried to not do that, right? Like that was the first thing. I think whenever something happens in the workplace, people have questions and they want answers pretty readily. So what we did was told them what we knew. And the things that we didn't know, we said, we don't know that right now. We can find out. Here's where we expect to find out, and just communicate that thoroughly. So I think that was first and foremost. After that, it just became, okay, this is the new reality. How do we work within the confines of what we have? So for us in the Pilates studio, we switched to virtual classes, which was very interesting. Because normally we're used to having people come in and use the equipment, and now because we were closed and not allowed to be open, we had to pivot, right? So we found out which instructors wanted to teach virtual classes and made the studio available to them to do that. And I think that went a long way. It allowed the clients to still see their favorite instructors, and it allowed the instructors to still see their favorite clients. So it was a win-win. And I think just being a little flexible in that regard makes a lot of sense. And then as we got new data, we would communicate it as fast as possible to the employees so they knew what to expect.
Yeah, that's so good. I think you're right on. Communication and just that transparency is so important. Just listen, this is what we know, guys, and this is what we don't know. And
Correct.
rather than let that vacuum of silence be filled with the negativity that we all fill vacuums with, just be direct. Like, listen, here's things that are true and that we can commit to, and here's things that are just up in the air. It's just unknown. And people, like you said, you knew what you didn't like, and that's still true. People want to know what you know, and they'll cut you slack if you're candid and transparent. But if they feel like you're not being honest, that's when things start to go sideways. So just being direct with people and communicating, it's so critical. So yeah, that's great stuff. I really appreciate you sharing that. So you've been around a while now and worked in corporate environments. What do you think has changed from maybe years ago when you were in corporate America, and even through the years that you've owned franchises? What's different? And not just the pandemic, but maybe something different with how people think about work or remote work or the generational differences. But what's changed that you've seen, and how have you had to pivot to lead teams well?
Yeah, I think there's been a huge shift in just the way we think about work coming out of the pandemic, and just maybe it's a sign of the times. I think it's the same thing would have happened even without the pandemic. It just might have taken longer, but we've really pivoted to where people want to be remote because they see that they were able to do their job at home under the comfort of their Wi-Fi for so many months. But you have to realize that doesn't work for everybody, right? Like it's hard to be a bank teller remote, right? How are you going to exchange cash remotely? So what we've done and what we tried to do is, where there was opportunity to make position remote, we did it. And that's something that maybe I've always took a liking to, because many of my jobs in IT were remote. So I always thought, hey, if I don't have to have someone in the office or in the studio, let them be at home. As long as the work is getting done, I don't mind that at all. So I've noticed that there's also a shift in just people wanting to, I think, do their own thing from an entrepreneurial standpoint, which is awesome. And it just makes us as business owners have to be a little bit more creative with how we bring people in and keep them engaged.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I totally agree. That's so good. So what would be your best advice for especially newer leaders who are coming in this environment currently and where things have changed and relationships to employees and employers and remote work? How would you, if you sit down with a new leader, what advice would you have for them to say, hey, make sure you do these, one or three things to really be successful in growing your teams?
Yeah, I think the first is don't be so rigid. Times change, seasons change, and we have to change with them as business leaders, right? I think the second thing is really understand what you're good at and only do that. So I told myself, I was new to Pilates. I'm never going to teach a Pilates class. That's not my strength, right? So I'm going to hire the best Pilates instructors that I can find and keep them employed, keep them happy. So I don't want to be the type of business owner who wants to like swoop down and do someone else's job. Nope. If you do a great job, you'll never worry about me, right? So those are the two things that I think I would tell an emerging leader.
Yeah, I think that's great. I think those are some of the kind of timeless truths, things that don't change over time. It's always important to delegate and show your trust in your team and make sure that they know that you're going to give them the space. I think of it as like step back so that they can step up and let them do and grow. And they can't do that if you're hovering over them. Yeah, so good. I appreciate that. Hey, listen, I know you're a reader and a learner and constantly, growing yourself so that you've got more to pour into the folks that you work with and your teams. What are you reading or listening to these days?
Everything. I'm a big podcast person or audiobook because I can listen to it when I'm walking the dogs or in the car. So I try to read about a book a month. And most of them are business related, franchise related, or sometimes just self-help books, but just learning a lot.
Okay, good. What's one or two that you recently finished up and got something out of?
Sure. So one that I restarted was Street Smart Franchising. It's everything you need to know before buying a franchise. I read it a couple years ago and wanted to revisit it and just finished it again.
Okay, great. And we'll link to that in the show notes. What's a podcast that you like to go to? And I'm totally with you on the audiobooks and podcasts. You can be walking dogs, you can be driving from place to place and still getting smarter.
Yeah. One of my favorites is The Skim has a podcast and a daily newsletter that they come out. They have a really creative way of introducing current events and they do it in like bite-sized increments. So it's great to watch if you're on the go.
Okay, excellent. Well, Chris, this has been great. So appreciate you coming on and sharing your stories and things that you're doing to grow your teams and build out those franchises. So if someone wanted to reach out to you, probably to talk about franchising, and maybe they're considering getting into that themselves and want to just talk about, hey, what do I need to do to narrow down the 4,000 choices to something that might make sense? What's the best way for folks to reach out and connect with you?
Sure. So I'll tell you, even if you're just thinking about it, we offer free consultations. So don't worry about having to pay to get some information. But the best way is my website, www.legacyfv.com, or phone number. You can call or text 689-244-1914.
Excellent. Well, this has been great, Chris. Again, appreciate you being on the show. Thank you so much. And I'm sure we'll be talking soon.
Ken, it was a pleasure. Thank you so much for having me.
You're welcome. Okay, and that wraps up another episode of the Clarity Advisors Show. Thank you so much for joining us, and we'll see you next time.
Thank you for listening to the Clarity Advisors Show. Clarity Advisors is a speaking, training, and consulting firm specializing in helping you simplify your sales and operating systems to improve efficiency and grow your profits. Connect with Clarity Advisors today to learn more about how they can help you improve communication and get your team aligned and engaged for greater success.